Part 2 of this series, Biomethane for Transportation, Opportunities in Washington State. We're very excited about the topics we're able to present with a clear focus on what's happening locally. By way of introduction, this series is hosted by the Washington State University Extension Energy Program. The WSU Energy Program is a self-supported department within the university. We receive project funding from federal agencies, federal power marketing agencies, the nonprofit Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, and many other sources. The WSU Energy Program has a staff of 60 working at our downtown Olympia office in Spokane and at other satellite locations. Our customers range from industrial plant managers to private consultants, commercial businesses, government agencies, and utilities. I'd like to take this moment to thank my colleagues, Carol Gold, Pauline Jensen, and Mike Steele, for their support during this project and with this webinar. The program today is sponsored by the Western Washington Clean Cities Coalition. Formed in 1998, the Western Washington Clean Cities Coalition is a public-private partnership organization dedicated to expanding the use and availability of alternative fuels and advanced vehicle technologies in the Pacific Northwest. We provide education, technical expertise, networking opportunities, and funding assistance to public and private partners to forge a region less dependent on imported oil and oriented more around sustainable transportation choices. The coalition is one of nearly 100 coalitions in the U.S. Department of Energy Clean Cities program, collectively advancing the energy, economic, and environmental security of the United States by supporting community-based efforts to reduce the use of petroleum in the transportation sector. This particular project is one of several that was part of a $15 million grant award that the coalition received in 2009. It was one of the largest grant awards in the country from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Projects funded through this grant, including this one, will put more than 400 alternative fuel and advanced technology vehicles on the road and build new fueling stations, including several hundred electric charging stations around Washington State. One quick note to all attendees: anyone new to this GoToWebinar system, take a quick look at your control panel. We invite you to type questions in the available questions box during the program and send them to the organizers. We'll do our best to address as many of them as fully as possible during the period for questions after the presentations. After the webinar, we'll do our best to provide answers to questions, including those that we may not have had time to address today. We'll get answers out to the attendees via email or on the website along with the recordings. I'm going to switch over now to the first of our presentations, presenting some information on the project that WSU has completed for Western Washington Clean Cities about specific biomethane opportunities in Washington State. We're going to talk quickly about some transportation issues, why this is an important subject, a little bit about natural gas and its use in transportation, how that connects up with biomethane, what are the various sources, specifically those in Washington State, what are some of the end users, the technologies involved, a quick kind of overview of technologies, and then a little bit on economics that we've been able to discover. This particular report that will be available soon dovetails very nicely with some work that's being done in Oregon as well. Matt Kromenauer at the Oregon State Office of Energy Office is working on a similar project with publicly owned treatment plants down there. Transportation is an important topic, and you can see some of the issues here. $14.5 billion spent on petroleum in Washington State. That's 3.3 billion gallons. In transportation, it makes up 45% of our greenhouse gases in this state. It's the single largest source of transportation of greenhouse gases. It's also linked to particulate matter pollution, and there are several areas in the state that are non-attainment areas, and that can be addressed very nicely with a transfer to natural gas or biomethane. We think CNG is the pathway forward for biomethane adoption. Natural gas as a fuel produces much less smog and less greenhouse gases than its petroleum cousins. Natural gas is for the most part made in the United States, so a domestic fuel, and currently is available on a diesel gallon equivalent for about $1.50 to $2, so some significant savings over diesel for heavy-duty trucks. It also qualifies for a fuel credit from the federal government, and more vehicles are coming to market. The manufacturers are developing conversion kits as well as dedicated vehicles for natural gas. And we think that's an important in for biomethane, which in comparison to natural gas has the same reductions in smog, but even more reductions in greenhouse gases. And because biomethane can be made from local sources, we even get to keep more of the dollars than the economic value here in Washington State. It can be produced, we believe, for about $2 to $3 per gallon equivalent compared to diesel, so still a better deal than diesel, and may be eligible for additional environmental credits or renewable identification numbers through the federal RFS, the Renewable Fuel Standard. It uses the same delivery infrastructure and any of the same vehicles that natural gas uses, and overall in the United States could produce over 250,000 new jobs. There are several potential sources of biogas for biomethane. Landfills is a sizable one, but you see already some of these larger landfills, Cedar Hills and Roosevelt, are already moving toward doing power production. But we have a great opportunity that we're going to learn about a little bit more this morning at the LRI landfill in Pierce County, where power and CNG will be part of that mix. Wastewater treatment plants are another important potential. And we have, again, several of the larger ones that have done projects of doing power production, or in the case of the South Treatment Plant in King County, they're putting the biomethane into the pipeline where Puget Sound Energy is using it to make power. But there are a couple of good opportunities in Tacoma at the Central Wastewater Treatment Plant, at Chambers Creek in Pierce County, and at Brightwater in Snohomish and King County, where there could be some additional emphasis on CNG. The other sources of biogas many of you have heard of include the dairy industry and digestion of municipal solid waste. In the case of dairies, many of the existing dairy projects, 6 altogether, they are producing electricity, but there are some concentrations of dairies you can see around the Yakima area and Moses Lake and Pasco that are actually close to some of these natural gas transmission lines, where if dairies were partnered together could take advantage of some of the potential benefits, economic and otherwise, of biomethane. The other major concentrations are up here in Whatcom County and Skagit County. And working together, some of the smaller medium dairies could put together a large enough project to get to doing CNG. I mentioned municipal solid waste is another potential resource. It's expanding with more and more technologies and more market development. More of this organic waste is being captured in our yard waste carts, or what are becoming organics waste carts, where instead, or in addition to composting, that material could be digested first. There are new technologies, some of them high solids digestion technologies, that could capture the energy value of those materials, before it goes to compost or fertilizer manufacture. And we have a couple of projects moving forward. The Bartek project uses a variation on agricultural digestion there in the Spokane area. In BC, Harvest Power is developing a high solids digestion project. And at Cedar Grove and Everett, they're planning to use a biofirm technology and are moving through the permitting process right now. The end users, for the time being, the focus is on captive fleets. That is, those fleets that work in a kind of a localized area and have a home base where they tend to return each night or come back during the day. The best opportunities are those vehicles that have very high annual miles and low mileage. They get very few miles, 4 to 6 or 7 miles per gallon of fuel. Those are really great opportunities. And you see some of the ones here in Washington State. Pierce Transit that uses natural gas right now. Some of the refuse companies, Waste Management in particular, has a track record of using CNG and also biomethane from some of their resources around the country. Clearscapes has also made the transition through some of the efforts of the City of Seattle, cities like Issaquah that have made fuel efficiency and reduced carbon intensity part of their contract with these companies. You also see the Seattle taxi fleets that are, many of them now, clean alternative fuel vehicles. As a result of this Western Washington Clean Cities project, they're powering up with natural gas CNG, but the opportunity then becomes for us to get some of those fleets to move over to biomethane. Sorry. Cleaning biogas, we talked about this a lot yesterday and had a lot of great information, but this diagram just shows you some of the choices that can be made if you're a project developer and how you go about cleaning gas and some of the trade-offs that you might look at. For smaller projects, just doing heat or power or a combination of combined heat and power is a pretty simple opportunity and something that can be done by removing the hydrogen sulfide and the water vapor from the gas. You don't have to clean up all the carbon dioxide necessarily to use it for heat and power. But with additional gas conditioning, removing the carbon dioxide, the H2O, H2S, and other trace gases, you can get it clean enough, create a biomethane that can be used directly for compressed natural gas or LNG, liquefied natural gas in vehicles. And for the CNG use, you can get it to about 90% methane or a little more than that and still use it directly in vehicles. To go to the pipeline, we're talking about 100% methane, get all the other trace gases out, and even every bit of trace carbon dioxide to get to liquefied natural gas. But if you can get to that point, once you're in the pipeline, that opens up a lot of opportunities for moving the gas and selling it to users down the road, down the pipeline, for whatever they may be wanting to do with it. Here's some of the basic information we've learned through our study, literature search of various studies on the economics of producing biomethane. You can see some of the results there. Smaller projects on the left here where the cost of producing biomethane is still pretty high relative to things like electricity, and certainly all of them or many of them higher than the cost of natural gas wholesale right now. But as you get to larger projects, you can see the cost of producing clean biomethane drops down to where for larger landfills it can compete directly with natural gas as a source. The cost of compressing biomethane adds something to the project, but what we've learned from talking with developers is that compressed biomethane or bio-CNG can be produced for about half of what diesel is today. So maybe double natural gas, but half of diesel. This leads us to the conclusion, something that's confirmed in these different studies, of reported thresholds for various size projects. So a dairy manure project alone would need about 8,000 cows, or the equivalent of gas of 8,000 cows if they're doing some co-digestion. Wastewater treatment plants, National Grid in the Northeast found through their economic analysis that about 17 million gallons a day treated and then digested the solids puts them in that threshold of seriously considering biomethane. And landfills, they need about 2+ million tons of waste in place, and then an increasing amount over time. In terms of power versus biomethane for fuel, here are some of the market trade-offs we've learned of. There's a lot of experience regarding power generation, and at the same time, some market variability. Some areas where digesters can get really decent prices for the electricity they're producing, others where the price availability is much lower and doesn't make for profitable projects. These projects tend to be tied to a local utility, so you need to get some buy-in from that utility. You don't have a lot of choices of where to go with electricity. There's low efficiencies. The engines themselves are about 30 to 35% efficiency on the high end, unless you find profitable uses for the heat that comes off of the engine. There is some preference in some of the U.S. grants, the REAP grants in particular, that give a preference to power generation. And in Washington State, I-937 provides a credit and a bonus for projects producing power from biogas. In terms of biomethane, you still need to use some of it to heat the digesters, but a direct use is great. If you can make direct use of the biogas, some larger dairies in the country are using it directly to power their milk trucks. If you can get it into the pipeline, that gives you a lot of flexibility. And there's very high efficiency in terms of natural gas equipment, boilers, engines, and vehicles. Currently, they're left out of some of the U.S. grants, as I mentioned, but there is a fuel credit of 50 cents per gallon equivalent, gas gallon equivalent, to natural gas and biomethane projects. And they can then produce renewable and carbon credits. So you get some of that benefit of the environmental benefit. That's pretty important in terms of market development. So overall, we see some terrific opportunities for the Clean Cities Coalition and other advocates to do some replacement of diesel and gasoline to replace some of those impacts with cleaner local biomethane. At this point, I'd like to turn the discussion over to Frank. Just a moment. Frank Mazanik is the Managing Director and Co-Founder of Biofuels Energy, LLC in Encinitas, California. He's a member of the Board of Directors of Onsite Energy Corporation. He's enjoyed a successful 35-year career in electric utility, competitive power, energy efficiency, and renewable energy industries. His knowledge and experience extends to all aspects of identifying and executing power generation projects that become long-term performing assets. His background covers a wide range of fuels, though through the last decade has focused on projects and markets for natural gas and biomethane. Frank has a BS in economics and finance from Fairleigh Dickinson University, a BS in civil engineering from the University of Vermont, and an MBA from the University of Southern California. Frank is with us today to talk about the project that he's developing at the LRI landfill in Pierce County. Frank, you can take it away.
Good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the development of the LRI CNG Energy Landfill Project. As an introduction to biofuels, and to give you an idea of the alternate uses of biomethane as a transportation fuel, I'd like to first highlight our San Diego project at the City of San Diego's Point Loma wastewater treatment facility. Although there's a Washington project at the Cedar Hills landfill in King County that injects biomethane into the Puget Energy pipeline, Biofuels Energy will be the first company in the state of California to treat gas from a wastewater treatment facility and inject it into an investor-owned utility gas distribution line, in this particular case, SDG&E. The California Rule 30 specification for injection is the most stringent in the nation. It requires 98% methane, as well as meeting constraints on many other constituents, including hydrogen sulfide, vinyl chloride, carbon monoxide, oxygen, water vapor, etc. This injected gas is referred to as directed biogas. In San Diego, this renewable gas will be directed to the University of California, San Diego, where it will fuel a 2.8 megawatt fuel cell, and similarly fuel a 1.4 megawatt fuel cell at the City of San Diego's South Bay Water Reclamation Facility. Biofuels is providing all of the necessary capital for the $45 million project. Again, that $45 million represents the gas cleanup project at Point Loma and the generating unit. We're also including a 300 kW fuel cell at Point Loma for the parasitic load of the purification equipment. I might add that the project has been financially supported by approximately $15 million in state of California SGIP grants, Self-Generation Incentive Program grants, an additional $16 million in federal investment tax credits and new market tax credit grants. So we've received approximately 2/3 of the total capital cost in grants for that particular project. The Point Loma wastewater facility is owned by the City of San Diego, and Biofuels is paying the city for approximately 1.1 million standard cubic feet of digester gas. That gas is approximately 62% methane. That would otherwise be flared. You could actually see in the upper right-hand corner the gas flares there. There's 3 gas flares. They will actually, when we purify at the proposed Budge site, we will actually bring those flares down. The city is also presently generating about 4.5 megawatts, with the other 2/3 of the gas that's being produced at this facility. But due to incremental cost of transmission upgrade, expansion, it wasn't financially feasible for them to use the balance of the gas. The city utilizes about half of the energy of the 4.5 megawatts that they generate at the site, and the other half is actually sold to SDG&E. Now, as you probably know, but I want to make sure it's understood by all, the biomethane molecules themselves that are being injected at Point Loma, as you can see in the map in the lower right-hand corner, it's at the very point of the peninsula, they won't be supplied to the University of California, San Diego, which is 28 miles away, or the South Bay facility, which is 15 miles away. The gas molecules at Point Loma will actually be cooking eggs in the morning for the residents down in Point Loma. As I said before, that's a first in the state of California. Turning now to Pierce County, Washington. Biofuels has executed a long-term 20-year contract with Waste Connections, who is the owner of the LRI landfill. And the project will be developed in phases and will include the production of a CNG product that will meet the California standard for compressed natural gas as a CNG transportation fuel. I'll actually review that specification a little bit later. Unlike the situation in San Diego, the renewable CNG will be delivered to customers within a 50-mile radius in 2 trailers, much like propane is delivered to outlying facilities today. The LRI project is located approximately 30 miles from Tacoma, 50 miles from Seattle, and about 5.5 miles due south of downtown Graham, Washington. Just wanted to digress a little. At one point in time, meaning about a year ago, and quite frankly, it's still a technical option, we considered delivering by tube trailer any biomethane that was not purchased by Washington customers and deliver that to Fort Lewis, as you can see in the upper left-hand corner. That's a connection to the Northwest Pipeline, which is approximately 4 miles away, where it could be effectively transported, and probably the most effective use would be in California as a directed biogas. So that was sort of an alternate backstop. Our first option for the LRI biomethane is to sell it as a CNG transportation fuel in Washington if users in the state of Washington are interested in the product and will step up to purchase it. It's our intent to actually develop the LRI landfill project in 3 distinct phases, and thought it was worth going over the numbers in regards to that development. One of the major difficulties in developing a CNG facility is contracting on a long-term basis for significant quantities of CNG. This is necessary for the banks and the other financing entities to be comfortable with the project revenue stream. And that's why, generally speaking, landfills and other digesters actually sell their product or make it an energy project, because once you enter into a contract with the utility, those 10-year revenue streams are put in place. So the challenge for the developer in the CNG arena is to be able to sell a significant quantity of the CNG on a long-term basis that would cut the mustard, if you would, for the banks and other financing entities. So we faced that problem, and as a result, the first phase of the project at the LRI landfill will use approximately 1,600 SCFM of landfill gas to generate 4.8 megawatts of renewable energy that will be sold to Puget Power under their Schedule 91 rate schedule for 10 years, creating sort of the financial base, if you would. In addition, approximately 570 SCFM of CNG is available as a transportation fuel. So, and of course, the question becomes, well, what does 570 SCFM mean in regards to CNG, and make it meaningful for us? Well, the initial targeted production of CNG is sufficient for about 880,000 diesel gallon equivalents a year, or enough for a fleet of about 160 trucks, driving the average of 25,000 miles a year, averaging 4.5 miles per gallon. The second phase of the LRI project will be the landfill gas of equivalent for an additional 4.8 megawatts of electricity, or, again, if there's an appetite in the state of Washington, enough for an additional 443 trucks. The first 2 phases require about 3,750 SCFM of gas, and right now, today, there's 3,200 SCFM at 50% methane gas equivalent being produced, and this higher level is actually expected to be achieved in a few years. In 2013, we'll be at that level already. Of course, a mix of incremental CNG production and energy generation can also be accommodated depending upon our success in selling CNG as a transportation fuel by the end of this year. With an additional 2,000 plus SCFM available, future phase 3 could produce an additional 3.1 million diesel gallon equivalent a year, enough for an additional 566 trucks. Alternately, if the state does not have the appetite for the CNG, an additional 6.4 megawatts of renewable energy could be produced. And depending upon the assumptions regarding future organic deposition, landfill gas production may actually peak at approximately 7,300 SCFM in the year 2030. So there's a possibility that there could even be more available. In summary, biofuels is prepared to make available up to 6.4 million diesel gallon equivalent a year of renewable CNG, or enough for almost 1,200 trucks, if entities in the state of Washington are interested in enough to step up to long-term agreements, or the state of Washington can otherwise subsidize in some fashion this concept. And I did want to take a break because remember I introduced the San Diego project where 2/3 of the $45 million was being provided in one way, shape, or form in terms of grants. That is not the case in this particular project. So if we wanted to jumpstart the CNG and we had some external financial support, that's also a possibility. If there is not a sale of the CNG, then the available gas will be utilized to generate renewable energy or otherwise transported to California at a future point in time as directed biogas, where it's anticipated to carry a financial premium. Just a quick look at the CNG facility itself. This is a plot plan. It's located in the southwest corner of the landfill, just off of Meridian Street. Graham is 5 miles up to the north. The truck patterns will remain the same. Trucks will enter as they do right now to this existing landfill, go down and go to the energy facility. So the ingress and egress will remain the same. This is a closer look at the site layout itself, just highlighting a few points. You'll note that there's the 3 Cat engines, 1.6 megawatt engines, and it will accommodate an additional 3 in the layout if we should go in that direction. Note the 4 CNG loading bays where tube trailers may be continuously loaded. There is available space to extend the number of bays in the future. The layout includes the Air Liquide skid, whose main purpose will to extract the 35% plus of CO2 in the gas. There. And then that's followed by a nitrogen removal system. The air permit has been submitted for a new flare, and the existing flares at the landfill site will be brought down and displaced by that one flare. But the flares at the site will continue to stay in place in case we're down for any operation. Then the existing flares will be utilized for the gas. I wanted to make sure that I made available the CNG gas spec, and I just like to highlight the methane content. 88% is significantly less than the 98% specification that's required for the injection of CNG into the pipeline in California, and to a lesser degree in Washington. I think it's 97 or 97.5 in Washington. Landfill gas presents a significantly greater challenge in terms of cleanup, however, than a wastewater treatment facility. So if a decision was ultimately made to transport the biomethane to California, the cleanup system required would be more rigorous than that necessary for CNG as a transportation fuel. Just share with you the highlights of the project development schedule. Both the air permit and the land use permit to Pierce County have been were submitted earlier this month, and we anticipate to execute a contract with Puget before the end of the year in December. And simultaneous to the permit activities, detailed engineering will progress during the first half of 2012. We anticipate that the permit process will be completed by the middle of the year. And this will result in CNG being available as a transportation fuel in the summer of 2013. The tube trailers themselves will be loaded at the landfill and compressed to 2,400 psi. Each trailer will take about 3 hours to fill at in phase 1. And there will be approximately 9 CNG trips per day in and out of the landfill for the first phase. It should be noted that off-site fueling stations will also need to be installed at or near customer locations. If the phase 1 CNG portion of the project is successful, we are also considering the possibility of constructing a merchant Pierce County CNG station available to the public to further the concept of CNG as a transportation fuel. The tube trailers themselves that we will utilize to transport the CNG will be fueled by CNG from the landfill. We anticipate purchasing 4 Cummins Westport ISL G 8.9 liter engines, in addition to all of the environmental reasons for the use of renewable CNG as a transportation fuel. In my mind, the most significant advantage is the implementation of this concept has the potential, if adopted on a wider scale basis, including the broader use of natural gas, it will reduce the country's reliance on gasoline imports and improve our balance of trade. If you haven't seen tube trailers I've been referring to, I just thought a few pictures might be helpful to give you an idea what that might look like. The customer base for CNG that is produced will hopefully be utilized as a transportation fuel, but could also be made available to large natural gas users interested in procuring renewable fuel. Although with the present prices on natural gas, this seems unlikely. It is more likely that municipalities, counties, or government agencies are the more likely candidates. Corporate entities with large transportation fleets or waste haulers or utilities also seem to be potential candidates. In closing, I'd like to highlight the potential yearly fuel savings for those considering the alternatives. The renewable CNG can be purchased in present-day dollars for approximately $2 a diesel gallon equivalent. That was at the lower end of the spectrum that was provided by Jim, as compared to, say, $4 a diesel gallon equivalent. The yearly fuel savings associated with the initial phase 1 160 trucks, 159 trucks, would be approximately $1.76 million a year in fuel savings, again, assuming 25,000 miles a year at 4.5 miles a gallon. For a full CNG build-out, the fuel savings could be as much as $13.5 million a year. A long-term purchase will provide the added benefit of dependable, predictable, long-term fuel sales. With that, Jim, I'd like to turn it back over to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Frank. Hey, a couple of quick questions while we're transferring over the presentation to Scott. Someone wanted to know, are you able to use the heat from those CAT engines?
Right now we are not able to use, we have no plans to utilize that heat, unfortunately.
So there'd be a significant heat resource there if industry was able to use it. And in terms of the gas cleanup technology, you're using an air liquide system. Can you describe that just briefly?
It has a PSA in the system, and again, I emphasize that the main focus of that air liquide system, there's many applications of that, including we're using the air liquide system down at the Point Loma facility. I would encourage you to go online and Google air liquide, is to remove the CO2 from the gas. I might add, I'm going to take the opportunity to just inject. You can see on this last slide I included John Rogers' name with Waste Connections. He's the district manager for the LRI landfill. So there were certain subjects as it related to the landfill and the public relations associated with the landfill. I would direct any of our listeners to contact John in that regard if there should be any questions.
Okay, now we're going to switch over to our third speaker and take additional questions at the end. Our third speaker here is Scott DeWeese. Scott's a grant administrator for the Western Washington Clean Cities. He joined the coalition last year to help manage the multiple grant projects occurring at the coalition right now, as well as to lend expertise with the Western Washington University Biomethane project at the Vanderhoek Dairy in Whatcom County. Previous to joining the coalition, Scott was a business analyst in the commercial solar industry and cut his teeth on developing ownership structures for third-party financed solar projects. Scott developed several of the firm's revenue forecast models and maintenance planning tools, which have since been adapted to show the value of adopting alternative fuel vehicles. Scott first encountered biomethane systems as a student at Western Washington University, where he received his degree in economics and environmental studies. Scott, thank you very much for joining today.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Frank. Welcome, everybody. I've got a bit of a disjuncted presentation for you today. First and foremost, want to talk to you about our own biomethane project at the Vanderhoek Dairy, as well as a couple of other biomethane-related initiatives our coalition is working on currently. And so in the middle, I'm going to take a step back and plug the Clean Cities program nationwide for any of our viewers today that are involved in biomethane production, use, or cleaning, just to plug the program and encourage you to reach out to Clean Cities, either our coalition in Western Washington or some of the other ones nationwide, and at the very least exchange information about your projects or biomethane initiatives. And then at the tail end of my presentation, I have some of my thoughts about, I guess, the key ingredients and obstacles associated with doing a biomethane to vehicle fuel project. So with that, I'll get right into it. Our coalition was fortunate in that we received a Recovery Act grant with a focus of reducing petroleum use in the Puget Sound region. Among the many projects in our grant, one of which was a partnership with Western Washington University, the Vanderhoek Dairy, and Bel Air Charters. And the intent was to upgrade an existing dairy digester to process biogas into biomethane for use as a vehicle fuel. Our role in this project was to provide funding for the vehicle fuel application, that is the upgrading equipment, the vehicle conversion, and some other funding associated with getting the project moving. The goals of our project were basically to demonstrate that dairy farm scale biogas projects are feasible and financially attractive. In addition to that, we also wanted to illustrate the energy resource available in Whatcom County. We have a really unique situation in that Whatcom County has a very large agricultural and dairy industry and is also the host to the Vehicle Research Institute at Western Washington University. So you have a world-class group of engineers looking at vehicle technologies of all sorts, and you also have a very strong influence in the community and an appreciation for agriculture. So there's a real opportunity there that the Vehicle Research Institute identified, and we were fortunate enough to participate in. And just to give you guys a sense of scale, there are 41,000 cows in farms 200 head or larger in Whatcom County. And based on a fairly conservative estimate of the amount of methane available in farms 200 cows or larger, we estimate that that would produce enough fuel to be equivalent to 3.9 million gasoline gallons per year. So there's a huge opportunity for this local community to produce its own fuel and, I guess, pioneer some of the technology and business models necessary to realize this untapped energy resource. A final goal of the project was to, I guess, basically change the game in terms of what technologies are considered for a small-scale project. And so the Vehicle Research Institute wanted to adapt an amine-based gas scrubbing technology to a scale that hasn't previously been done, and that would be the farm scale that we're describing. So rather than using, I guess, more capital-intensive, off-the-shelf gas cleaning technologies, we were looking to prove that a low capital cost gas scrubbing technology would be viable, and therefore, I guess, reduce one of the barriers that these projects sometimes encounter. And there's the stars of the show right there. You can see them up front. They're very photogenic heifers we've got at the Vanderhoek Dairy. And in the background, you can see this is this container here houses the compressing equipment for the fueling station. And these contact towers here are where the gas is cleaned and refined of its contaminants. And then on top of the container, you can see our storage vessels, and there's a two-line dispenser back there. I mean, as you can see, the facility is mostly built right now. Our CNG station is operating. The vehicle for the Bel Air charters has been converted. I'll talk a bit more about that. And the biogas refinery, the cleaning process, has essentially been constructed and is undergoing testing and some small process revisions right now. Like any project of its first, there were a lot of challenges and changes that occurred along this process. You know, starting with the vehicles, we had a tourism company that operates a fleet of coaches, MCI coaches, and those vehicles use an ISL, a Cummins ISL engine. And so we believed that they were going to be fairly good candidates for being retrofitted with an ISLG engine for use to use the natural gas. There were challenges associated with retrofitting those vehicles that we didn't foresee, and unfortunately we were not able to convert the vehicles we had planned on converting to run on natural gas. So what that meant was that we had to scale back the number of vehicles and the amount of fuel that we were going to be able to consume with this off-taker, and instead chose off-the-shelf vehicles, Ford E450 series vehicles with gasoline-based V10s that could be converted using EPA-certified kits. In addition, you know, as I said, one of the ideas here was to show that a new process that hadn't previously been used before was a viable option. Now, this was an existing dairy digester that has a genset producing electricity for the grid and has been online for several years now. And the idea is that one of the disadvantages of using an amine-based process or solution-based process for cleaning your gas is that you need a lot of heat energy to maintain that process. So the plan was to use some of the waste heat that was coming off of the generator as a feedstock for the heat necessary to operate the regeneration system. But what we didn't foresee was that the farm had plans to replace that genset with a unit that was higher efficiency and produced a lower grade waste heat. And that sort of threw a wrench into the plans. In addition, there were challenges associated with the gas cleaning system itself. It had been designed to operate at a pressure that was later determined wouldn't meet the gas cleaning specifications we required, and therefore was a bit more capital intensive. In that previous slide, I showed the two contactor towers. The original design called for those two towers to be operating in parallel, but in order to meet the gas quality requirements we had set out to meet, the system had to be run in series instead. And it would have been a better design to have a single tower rather than two towers in series. But again, those are the things you learn. Setting out in this project, we believed that we would be able to provide fuel at $2.50 per gasoline gallon equivalent delivered to the off-taker. And there were challenges associated with that, and I guess one of which, and I'm jumping ahead here, but I guess partner expectations is a real paramount concern for this project. And what we discovered was we had a farmer. We have a farm here that has an established contract with a power utility and had a very favorable price for electricity that they were receiving. Now, as Frank showed in his PowerPoint, you really don't need to divert a large stream or a large portion of the gas you can produce at one of these facilities necessarily to meet the amount of fuel that you're trying to make. And that's the case with this dairy as well. We were looking to use only a very small portion of the gas that was being produced by the facility as vehicle fuel, and the remainder would still be used to generate electricity. But it was difficult to quantify the amount of gas that we were going to need. And between the seasonal variation in the gas production, the farm upgrading their engine and therefore being able to use more gas, we were in a scenario where we needed to compensate the farm for at least the amount that they would earn in burning that biomethane as an electricity product. And consequently, our vision of using a product that had essentially a value of zero because it was a flare gas and turning it into a vehicle fuel changed in terms of diverting what was already a valued product into vehicle fuel. And so that really changed the economics of our project. That, coupled with the fact that we didn't have access to this heat resource, means that we were in a scenario where we were not going to be able to meet that $2.50 gallon goal. Right now it looks like we're probably going to hit $3 a gallon, which is, I think that's still a success because this is a very small-scale project, and as some of the conventional research has shown, even being able to hit $3 a gallon at this scale is really a testament to the efficiency of our gas cleaning system. But as many of you know on the phone, the price of natural gas needs to be much lower than gasoline or diesel in order to justify the off-taker purchasing this more expensive vehicle. There has to be a significant margin there for the end user to recoup their investment on the vehicle. And these prices do exclude the 50 cents per gallon or net 40 cents per gallon federal tax credit that the university will be able to take, although that is slated to end at the end of this year. So there's a bit of uncertainty associated with leaning on that tax credit for the economics of this project. So, what we learned really is that, really clear communication between the different partners is paramount for a project like this. If we had a bit more notice and foresight about the initiatives that the farm had in terms of their power generation, I think that might have altered our strategy a bit. And I think that also really supports the point that projects of this complexity require a dedicated project manager. In this case, the university was the project manager, and of course their core business is educating students. So there was a challenge associated with, I guess, basically just the amount of legwork needed to keep all these moving pieces at the same speed. And I think we probably would have been able to set better expectations among the off-takers and the providers of the gas had we had an intermediary in there acting as a dedicated project manager. Another thing that is sort of an important consideration that kind of hit us in the face, it was funny actually, is that as a contingency for this project, we set up fossil fuel-based natural gas to our fueling station in order to meet some timing deadlines. But really, in Whatcom County, there is no natural gas pump right now. So this this off-taker, Bel Air Charters, really needed us to have a backup source of gas in the event that the refinery or the digester itself wasn't producing enough gas or gas to the quality that we needed. So what seemed like maybe a capitulation at first really ended up working to our advantage, which is that our facility was designed to operate on either biomethane or natural gas. That's been really helpful, and I would submit that that's another important consideration if you're looking at developing a project where there is no conventional CNG network available. Like I said, I think this just further illustrates the point about the university being in a tough spot to manage this project. They had to establish 3 different contracts with 3 different types of entities in order to make this project work. You know, there was a land lease and an energy purchase from the farm. There was our grant, which had contractual requirements that were somewhat inflexible based on the fact that it was Federal Recovery Act dollars. That made it challenging at times as this project took several different forms during its lifetime. And then there's the end user, which is really going out on a limb here because they're converting vehicles for their core business that can only be fueled at one location. And this is not a conventional provider of gas. This is a university. So there was a lot of special considerations that had to go into their contractual arrangement with the university in order for both parties to feel comfortable with this. And so, another lesson learned here is that, I'll back up and say that this is the second, or is possibly going to be the second biogas to vehicle fuel project on a dairy in the nation. And the first project, the Hillerides Dairy in California, the end user is the dairy. They're fueling their own trucks with the fuel. So any opportunity that a project can connect the gas producer with the gas user in a closer fashion, I think eliminates a lot of these challenges. If the gas user is the farm, they have a vested interest in making sure that the system that's producing the gas is operating properly and that the supply of gas will always be there. So I submit that that's a really important consideration. If there could have been a contractual arrangement between the dairy and the off-taker directly, that also probably would have gone a long ways to alleviate some of the complications in the contract arrangement here. So that's basically all I have to say about the Vanderhoek project. As I said, right now the system is operating on pipeline natural gas. The university has tested the biomethane facility and is just working through some sort of process revisions to make that system work. And there's we're still working on, or they're still working on the regeneration process for the solution that cleans the gas. So we're not quite there yet, but we have a lot of the bricks in place and the mortars starting to set up. And so just quickly wanted to identify some of the other areas our coalition has been working on biomethane. As Jim said, we're a sponsor of WSU's Biomethane for Transportation Opportunities. That's a publication that WSU is putting out that identifies sources throughout Washington and how they might be used and utilized and what are some of the challenges associated with that. And we've also provided consultation for project developers and wastewater treatment plants in evaluating biomethane as a vehicle fuel. And we also, are working to identify and assist end users of biomethane because, as both of the Jims and Mary Ann pointed out, this is an extremely low carbon fuel that is clean burning and provides significant domestic economic benefits. So we're really excited to see this market grow, and we're working towards that. And so with that, I'm going to launch into my pitch for Clean Cities, which is just that, Western Washington Clean Cities is not alone in their interest and support for biomethane to vehicle fuel projects. There are 90 coalitions nationwide, and they serve 78% of our population geographically. So for those non-Washingtonians on the phone with us today, make sure to connect with your local Clean Cities Coalition if you're interested in exploring any parts of the value chain of biomethane, because we'd certainly love to know about your project and assist you if we're at all able to. And we don't really actually offer free hats, but we do offer a lot of workshops to try and communicate to end users and vendors about the opportunity, not just for biomethane, but for all alternative fuels, as well as behavioral changes and vehicle technologies that will help our nation reduce its dependence on oil. So I've said it before, but like I said, if you're interested in using biomethane, producing it, or you have a technology that assists in either of those areas, reach out to us in Western Washington or your local Clean Cities Coalition. And it looks like I'm getting pretty close to the end of my time here. I'm going to jump forward. You know, one of the things that I'll point out is that, you know, I think for these projects on a dairy to grow organically, you're always going to have a power component. I think Frank alluded to that in his presentation. The amount of gas that comes off of these systems is dramatic, even at a dairy scale. And, of course, the challenge with producing vehicle fuel at a dairy is that that's not usually a center where you're going to have a lot of users. So in almost all scenarios, you're going to be able to produce a lot more vehicle fuel than you're going to find customers to use. And you have the opportunity maybe to put it in a pipeline or use tube trailers to take it off site. But of course, there's pretty significant costs with either of those options. And so I would suggest to you that you're always going to have a power generation component, because you need the heat from that power generator to heat your digester. You need the stability of having a customer to purchase power from you for 10 years in order to line up the capital necessary to build a digester. And, you know, interestingly, and this is an area I'm not well educated on, but I'm certainly interested in learning more, but in the traditional dairy digester model, you're putting a pretty dirty fuel into these generators. And if you have the opportunity to sell a higher margin fuel as vehicle fuel and invest in the equipment necessary to clean that fuel, there may be a pretty attractive opportunity to clean all of your gas and then run a clean gas through your generation, your power generation system, and save on maintenance. So I think that's an area that's really exciting, something that we've identified and are looking to learn more about, is just what are the financial savings associated with using a clean fuel and maybe being able to realize some economy of scale with your gas cleaning system. And so with that, you know, I mean, I've alluded to this, but really what's the interest here is there's significant margin in producing a vehicle fuel substitute rather than power. Our digester in Whatcom County is very fortunate and receives a really favorable electricity rate for the power it produces, and that makes the commodity value equal to about $1.15 a gallon. Well, we know that if we can sell that fuel for somewhere under $3 a gallon, well, I guess somewhere under $2.50 a gallon, we're going to be able to bring customers to the market. So there's an opportunity here to produce a fuel that has, you know, maybe a higher benefit to the community and to that farmer itself. And of course, we've all noted that natural gas is through the floor right now, so it's really difficult for a biomethane or a renewable natural gas project to compete head-on with fossil fuel natural gas. You know, but the hope is that the proper incentives will be created so that there's at least a level playing field for generating electricity or generating a vehicle fuel from biogas, and that might help to shrink the gap between the costs associated with producing biomethane for vehicle fuel. And so with that, Jim, I think I'm going to cut myself off here so that we can take any questions.
Okay, Scott, thanks very much. Scott and Frank, really appreciate the insight that you've given to everyone today. What I had hoped we would accomplish, and I think we've done that well, is to demonstrate to our audience that Washington State has many local sources. In particular, the LRI is one that's developing quickly here on a fairly large scale that end users can tap into. We've got some fairly significant end users in between the refuse fleets, public transportation, school buses, the taxi fleets, and interestingly, there's been talk lately of the Washington State ferries maybe using liquefied natural gas in some of their larger ferries down the road, and that would be a great opportunity to include some biomethane in that. And to kind of show what's involved in developing these projects, what are some of the market trade-offs, some of the costs and benefits, I think that's been really good. We do have some questions already, and I'd like to remind attendees that they can go to their control panel and ask a question of the organizers. We'll do our best to get to as many of them as possible, but we'll send out questions and some review of that with information later. Some of the first questions had to do with some of the incentives that were available to projects out there. And the federal credit you alluded to already, Scott, was going out of business at the end of the year. What do you see as the prospects for that going forward?
Well, you know, Jim, there is an effort right now to reinstate that credit, as well as a credit associated with the infrastructure for a compressed natural gas system. It's a trying time to renew or provide new incentives, just given the state of our economy and federal budget. But I think that, of course, there's a lot of people that are really in tune to the fact that we have to make an effort to change our energy consumption sources and habits in this country. So, I'm pleased to see that oil remains around $100 a barrel, and I think that will continue to keep the focus on the need for incentives in this market.
One of the questions came in about renewable identification numbers, which relate to the federal renewable fuel standard, number 2 in particular. Biomethane would qualify as an advanced fuel under that system, but to my knowledge, nobody has done any specific RINs to a biomethane project. That first presentation, the question related to some of the costs related to biomethane and biomethane cleanup to biomethane, that did not include RINs. That was just the cost of cleaning up the gas to create biomethane. But I wondered if, Frank, what your thoughts are about renewable identification numbers or the California market, and where some of those kinds of structures, either the federal RIN system or the California low carbon fuel standard, that's really key, isn't it, to some of the market for biomethane to get over that margin with natural gas?
It certainly is, and it was indicated it's very difficult in putting together a pro forma and developing a project to count on the existence of those today with the situation of both the federal and local budgets as they are, and counting on a continuation of those. So to bring it specifically to the LRI project, we are not explicitly counting on those in there for obviously for the generation portion of the project, but that all comes into play in terms of the long-term contract, if they should be continued or they should solidify. The opportunity to make the CNG as a transportation fuel more cost competitive will be improved.
Yes, one of our attendees has indicated to us that there's currently no pathway for doing RINs from a biomethane project, and that can be a costly endeavor. So it's likely going to be one of the larger projects that gets through that hurdle first. Another question, Frank, have you done any kind of energy balance for the project there at LRI? You know, energy in versus energy out kind of thing.
Well, let me go about 11 to 12% of the BTUs that come into the system are effectively not cost effective to further circulate. That's why that additional flare literally needs to be put up. Because of the turn down ratios of most of the existing flares, you would need to utilize more of what ultimately could be product gas. So you want to put in a new flare that is a very small turn down ratio, but approximately, again, approximately between 10 and 12% of the incoming BTUs are otherwise rejected back out of the flare. The other 88% become product.
For both of you guys, maybe Scott, you can start off in terms of vehicles and comparing the use of biomethane in vehicles to CNG from natural gas or from diesel. How does the cost per mile differ for operations and maintenance? We know there's a significant capital premium in terms of converting or purchasing new natural gas vehicles. What about operations and maintenance? Are there any savings there that we can point to versus diesel or natural gas?
Yes. You know, to first discuss gasoline, I would say that CNG is a very similar fuel to gasoline, and therefore in a light-duty vehicle, you're not likely to see a real significance in maintenance one way or the other. CNG is a cleaner fuel, but it also requires that certain vessels need to be inspected every several years. So there's a cost associated with that a gasoline vehicle doesn't see. But with diesel, it's really a more exciting story because CNG produces so much less particulate matter when burned than diesel that it does not require the same after-treatment devices that are required on 2010 or newer diesel vehicles. So, you know, you see the refuse industry has really caught on to this early because those trucks are typically in neighborhoods and being driven in a duty cycle where they're not heating up as much as a diesel engine and a diesel particulate filter would like, and therefore they recognize really significant cost savings in using a CNG vehicle relative to a diesel truck that needs to be 2010 emission compliant.
Excellent. Frank, a particular question regarding your presentation. You had some production numbers there of, I think, gasoline gallon or diesel gallon equivalents in different phases. Were those numbers per day or over the annual cycle? I think in phase 3 you mentioned 3.4 diesel gallon equivalents per year, 3.4 million, and 566 trucks. Is that 3.4 million gallons per year?
Per year, which is enough.
And 500. Go ahead.
Which is enough to fuel that number of trucks per year at the 25,000 mile a year assumption.
Okay, great. Thanks. Has anyone used biomethane or CNG for a police fleet? You know of. I haven't heard of anything myself.
Not here either.
And then a follow-up, Frank, on the discussion about the flare. Is that heat that could be used elsewhere in your project?
It could be if there was a a need for heat. I mean, you get into the possibilities of whether you could put in an absorption chiller, maybe even for air conditioning. You're at a landfill. That might be exotic for one or two people on the operations side, but or if there were to be digesters on the site. But as of present, that is not contemplated. That's an option for the future.
Frank, we had another question. This is fairly complex about the market in Central California. Perhaps you've got some information here about some dealings with the Tulare Board of Public Utilities and what's going on there with garbage trucks going back to diesel. It's back to diesel-powered engines for 9 of their 33 garbage trucks in Tulare. Are you familiar with any of those?
No, I wish I could help. I wish I could help. I haven't heard that, and I'm sorry, I don't know anything about it.
Okay. Any other?
Here.
Yes.
Somehow we lost our telephone. I apologize.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? We'll give it a minute here. I'm going to try and we'll put out a sheet afterwards with questions and some of the comments that people have been sharing with us. But any other questions right now? Then I think we can, one more? So what are the opportunities for green tags as a commodity? I've read some on renewable energy certificates, but don't know how established it is, and perhaps, Scott, you could address that with your economics background. Maybe Scott's lost on the phone. What I can tell about green tags are particular to the power market. Renewable energy credits are created and typically represent the environmental benefits of creating a megawatt of renewable power. Typically solar or wind or power from a digester is considered renewable power in this case. And specific to Washington State, we have a crediting system resulting from our Initiative 937, which is requiring public-owned or investor-owned utilities to achieve a certain level of renewable power in the future. And one of the challenges right now for digester projects is that in some states, digesters, farm-scale digesters, for example, are able to monetize a REC for the power generated from the project, but they're also able to monetize a carbon credit from the reduction of methane that happens early on before the power production happens. In Washington State, though, all of those attributes are combined into the qualification for I-937 power. So some of our farm-scale digesters right now are missing out on a potential market there. That might open up an opportunity for some to move into biomethane because that's a different marketplace. And what we're talking about with renewable identification numbers is completely separate from renewable energy certificates or renewable energy credits. So there are some trade-offs there that project developers need to consider as they look forward into the future.
It might be helpful just to put a little sort of meat on the bone in terms of regional differences in the RECs. I had mentioned that we intended to sell the electricity Puget under their Schedule 91, and under that, Puget has an option to actually purchase the RECs and all of the environmental attributes that go along with that. The price, and I'm being somewhat liberal here, might be someplace in the vicinity of the equivalent of 1 cent per kilowatt hour. Okay, might be a little more if it was from dairy farms versus a landfill, but it's still approximately in that area. California, for example, is between 3 and 4 cents per kilowatt hour just for the REC itself, if you had a facility in California. So there's a significant state-by-state differential depending on the goals and the objectives in the Public Utility Commission guidelines on that. And again, just going on a little bit further on the same subject, there's quite a lot going on from a regulatory perspective in the state of California in regards to the importation of biogas as directed biogas. It actually falls into the equivalent of what's a third tier. It isn't the as high a priority as it was a year ago and 2 years ago. And consequently, the REC, if one were to sell a REC from an out-of-state project into California, its value, instead of being the 3 to 4 cents, is significantly less being sold into California. So the regulatory background as it relates to RECs and the value of RECs is changing. It's up in the air. It's cloudy. And that just adds to the difficulty that developers have in knowing exactly where they stand. And, you know, you've mentioned RINs before. So you get these sort of incentives from the RECs on the energy side, but there's not the equivalent incentives on a long-term tradable basis that's been yet developed on the biogas side. So it's time for that side to catch up with the energy side.
Frank, we've got a follow-up on LRI. Is it reasonable to assume that if the current disparity between natural gas versus the cost to produce a renewable CNG continues, that in the end it might be more cost-effective to simply produce electricity with the low-cost generators?
Yes, that is, and that's why we actually have it in phases. You know, it wasn't too long ago when we had Katrina and gas was $12 and $13. I know the situation has changed a lot with the fracking and the gas and the projections, but things change with time. The gas source is there. We have a 20-year contract at LRI, and as I mentioned, we're doing it in phases, but it is possible that if the situation stays as is and the differential between diesel and renewable, even though it's maybe half the price, as long as natural gas still sticks below that, then it's possible that that users won't step up if you would for the long-term contract, and the result is we would proceed with electricity as was indicated in that plot plan with an additional 3 units. But then again, we would look to phase 3 for CNG, and hopefully the environment might change further down the line that we could go to CNG at that point in time, additional CNG.
Okay, I think we've got all the questions here. I will just take this opportunity to give a shout out to Mike Michaels, who's been on for both of our webinars here and has given us many comments about his company, Cornerstone, based out of there in Wisconsin. They have a gas cleanup system, and he'd like everyone to go check that out at biocng.us. Thanks, Mike. Thanks to everyone who's attended our webinar series. It's been great for us as the host, and I hope very informative and educational for everybody who's tuned in. We will get more information out to you by email regarding the video of these presentations and the questions and answers and other materials that we're developing as part of our project with Western Washington Clean Cities. Thank you all very much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Jim.
The organizer has